Hello and welcome to That's Not Spit, It's Condensation. I'm Ryan Beach, and on this episode, I'm joined by Ben Gunnarson, who is a grad student at USC, University of Southern California. He's in the Disneyland Band. He's principal trumpet of the Bay Philharmonic, and he just recently won a position with the president's own Marine Band. I met Ben at Brevard this past summer, and I felt like we got along pretty well, and it was great to share some ideas with Ben and then get some feedback from that because Ben is very thoughtful in his own right about how he goes about practicing and things like that. And as I was getting feedback from him, just based on some of the things that we had talked about in Brevard and how he had been using those, he just was saying so much good stuff. I thought it would be good to have an actual episode where my listeners can hear what he has to say as well. So before we get into the meat of the episode, Ben, I just want to thank you for joining me on my podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. This is going to be awesome.
Yeah. So let's just dive right into the audition itself. You could talk about the day itself and what that felt like in the rounds, or if you want to go more into the actual preparation of how you prepared for the audition, I'll kind of let you start this out wherever you want to start it out, and we'll go from there.
Oh man, it's a great question. It's also a big question. I think preparing for an audition, it can be a very involved process. It can also be a very simple process. I think it just depends on what you need to perform at your best, and maybe what you've experienced in the past, what you know might be some of the things that you need to change in order to be better on whatever your next pursuit's going to be. When it comes to doing any sort of audition or performance or anything that can be a kind of a capstone like that, I think that the way that you prepare can make such a difference. And I know it sounds a little simple to say, but it really does make a difference. And I think over the course of auditioning, not just for the Marine Band, but for so many other ensembles leading up to that, I kind of was humbled. I learned a lot about maybe blind spots that I had or things that I didn't know that I needed to improve until I actually got in the room and did it. And so for me, the process of getting ready for the audition and preparing for it, I think was not just a process of working, but a process of discovery too.
Interesting. So I totally agree with you, having the ability to sort of assess what went well, those types of things, and then also being willing to maybe not hold your preparation so tightly, but being willing to adjust things as needed. When you say you were humbled by this process, can you, I guess the first question would be, how do you feel like that affected either your mindset or your actual preparation? Like, you feel humbled. How does that actually how does that affect you as someone who's preparing for an audition or taking the audition itself?
I That's a good question. I think generally I have a pretty good ability to remain objective. I know that maybe that wasn't always the case for me, but I know in my recent past that's something that I've been able to kind of do um, at whenever I was faced with maybe some surprises or some things that happened in auditions, some results that I wasn't expecting, stuff like that. I think it's really easy to get down on yourself and beat yourself up. But at the end of the day, while maybe that could help motivate you a little bit more the next time, I think there's a lot of better ways of analyzing your performance and doing so in a way that is a little more objective rather than just being mean at yourself or being upset or things like that. Just leads to better results. You get where you want to be faster, you make improvement at a higher rate, you're more efficient in the work that you're doing when you can remain objective. So, maybe you advance to a round that you hadn't expected to get to, and it's like, oh, great, that's awesome. And then you're in the semis now, or you're in the finals, and you totally fall flat on your face. It's a lot of people would see that as like, oh, I totally blew it. Gosh, I'm so stupid. It was going so well, and then it all fell apart. And I realized very early on that the process of auditioning, at least for me, was not a sprint. It was a marathon. And that being, I know people say, getting on the audition circuit, where you're taking multiple auditions. I did early on realize that was kind of going to be what I needed to do, and the process that was going to work for me. I know that there are some amazing trumpets out there that win these huge auditions on their first or second ever audition. And to those people, I tip my hat and say, congratulations. I'm not one of those people. That was not something that, at least at this stage in my performing career and in my kind of auditioning career, I needed steps. I needed to get there and learn a lot of things that I guess I hadn't learned yet. Um, and so I think when it comes to just keeping a good mindset about that, being prepared for things that might humble you, staying objective was really, really helpful to me. And just taking everything at face value. If I didn't do well on a semifinals round, it's not an act of God that made it so I didn't do well. Like, there are real things that prevented me from moving on or prevented me from advancing. You can't control how well other people play, and you can't take that personally. I know one of my very first auditions I ever took, I for a military band, I made it to the semifinals. And I was a little surprised. I was like, "This is cool. I'm happy that I made it here." And then the person in the semifinals round that went right before me, that I could hear in the audition room, when I was waiting in the green room to go on, that person played so well, amazingly well. And this was at the point, it was late in the round, so they were doing their sight reading. And I listened to the sight reading, and this was the person that eventually won that audition and now is in a major symphony orchestra. Um, I, I was listening to the sight reading, and it was like, this sight reading is better than I could play any of these excerpts. So, like, holy moly, what am I doing? Um, and I got home from that. Obviously, I didn't advance. I did not make it to the finals of that audition. And I got home and I thought to myself, was that line of thinking helpful in any way? And it really wasn't. It just got me psyched out a little bit. It got me nervous and distracted from what my job was, which was just to go in and play well. Um, and at the end of the day, focusing on the fact that that person went before me wasn't going to help my performance at all. And it wasn't going to help my ability to improve. So the lesson I learned early on is to take everything objectively and use that information in a way that's going to help you. Because any other thing that you're going to try and do emotionally or with letting things get personal or beating up on yourself just isn't going to get you that far.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much good stuff. I have learned and have tried to become more objective in my practicing, my preparation. So I kind of want to dig into that first, but I don't want to forget also, you talked about that it's a marathon and not a sprint. And you had said something to me in our previous sort of get together where you had said this preparation was easier because of all of the work I had done in previous auditions. So I kind of want to touch on that. But first, let's talk about being objective, because it's a good sounding thing, but I kind of want to dig into a little bit more of what you mean. Like, I would assume, based on what you're talking about here, is focusing on the controllables and not focusing so much on how I feel on any given thing. But I also think like when you're talking about it's the way to progress the fastest, my assumption is you're talking about in your practice sessions, focusing less on how you feel about whether or not you're playing well and a little bit more on what are the objective things that I can improve upon. What are the, so when you are trying to be more objective in your practice, what are ways that are there certain goals that you're setting for yourself, or are there certain ways you go about doing your work to help it be more objective?
That's a great question. I think a lot of that actually exists mentally for me, less in my physical process of shedding an excerpt, but mentally. I think a lot of the objectivity I'm thinking about, I can pair uh, very directly with positive self talk.
Mm.
I know that when we're talking about especially things like performance anxiety or being able to perform under pressure. There's a lot of discussion about self-talk and about what's your inner monologue saying, and how are you talking to yourself, and how are you processing what you're going to do next. And I had to learn a lot of kind of better ways to do that when I was exposed to this idea of monitoring your self-talk and making things more positive, and uh, making your self-talk into something that's going to be a little bit more productive. I had a lot to learn. I realized that there were a lot of things that I was saying to myself that didn't allow for improvement, or didn't it was they were very kind of dead end comments. And you've probably heard of these before. It's like, oh, I'm not good at double tonguing. This excerpt just isn't my style. I don't play jazz. Like, there's so many of these kind of very concrete dead end statements that I'm sure all of us have said to ourselves at some point. A lot of that, I think, is a coping mechanism. It's I think maybe cop out, maybe a little bit of a strong word for that, but it's a way for us to sort of dismiss whatever's at the root of the problem, um, and make our brain sort of be at peace with it and kind of forget about it. And while that may make us a little more comfortable, it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't make you better at double tonguing or make you a great jazz player, um, by just, you know, saying that. So I had to realize with my self talk, well, those statements are a little bit opinionated and aren't super objective. They're not helping me. Somebody that I talked with about this a lot was Nathan Warner. He talked about it. The one of the first things that I was exposed to was, saying, instead of saying that you're bad at something, you have to say that it's a future strength.
Mm.
And that was like, whoa, that was such a kind of a brain blast moment of how many of those things out there can you change the mindset of? Can you make into something that could help you improve? Um, and from then on, I started catching myself whenever I would think things or assume something about maybe how I was playing or how an excerpt went or something like that, um, to double check and be like, is there a better way to think about this? Is there a way to envision maybe this question or this statement in a way that's going to be more productive? So, like, instead of saying, I'm just not a great double tonguer, mentally that might look like, uh, I would say instead, double tonguing in the past has been something that I struggled with. Double tonguing is something that I can improve a lot more on. Um, and while essentially you're kind of saying the same thing, it allows for a much more productive line of thinking to continue
Mm.
after that, and allows for the ability to just keep going on. And so I think for me, when I'm talking about remaining objective, a lot of it kind of went into that corner of self-talk. I think more on a practical sense, being objective, I've got a lot of left brain in me. Before I was a professional musician, I really was almost going to go be a mechanical engineer. And for me, my left brain side is very just like facts, figures. Let's get it figured out. The it very strongly balances out any sort of emotional response that I might have to a situation. And
Yeah.
so I make sure that I rely on that when it comes to maybe getting to the finals and not advancing past the finals. I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but like for military bands, I was in 3 different finals for the same branch in a row. I went 3 times in a row to this same military band, made it to the finals all 3 times, and did not make it. Did not get selected on any of those 3 tries. And you get to the end of the third one, it's like, oh my gosh, the pressure starts to mount up, the mental pressure on yourself to be like, all right, what did you do wrong? What is there, and even for me, I had to fight the urge to just get down on myself and be mad and be depressed and be upset about it. But I think what really ended up happening was I started to stay objective as I can. I was like, all right, so I have skills enough to get me to the finals. What's next? It's not just chance that I'm not making it in. Like, there's more here that I can do to push me over the edge. And that actually really helped inform my approach for the Marine Band audition, and really helped me identify so many more areas that I could work in and do preparation in to cover some of those things that in the past maybe I had taken for granted or hadn't even thought about.
Interesting. So when you're saying objective, I think I'm just thinking of that word differently than you're thinking of that word. It sounds like where it's not so much of like, I mean, I'm sure it has the application that I'm talking about, but it sounds like you're saying for you, one major part of being successful is just getting your mind right. Because if you get your mind right and you have sort of this more positive outlook, it informs the way you're going to attack various weaknesses in the practice room, or with the amount of maybe even just a resiliency that you would have in the practice room. If you're saying, this is something I can improve on, but I haven't found the solution, is different than like, I just can't do this. Like the first version, you're more willing to probably stick with it longer and keep trying new solutions. So I don't want to put words in your mouth. Is that sound more like what you've been describing?
Absolutely. I think and that's something I had to learn. I didn't know to do that for a very long time. I think the default unfortunately is to be a little bit more concrete even without knowing it. And it sort of locks you away from potential that otherwise you might have.
Interesting. Yeah. I completely agree with this. There's a book I read with we just talked about this with my studio at UNA. We read this book, Chop Wood, Carry Water, which is a very approachable personal development book, and a lot of it has to do with, nothing is a test, but only everything's an opportunity to learn, sort of mental things like that, to start just sharing the idea that not everything has to be this like, I'm either good enough or I'm not. There could be some other ways to look at it. If you're okay with it, part of what I'm hoping to do, to learn from you and hopefully my listeners as well, can you give us some sort of an idea of how you go about refining the excerpts? Like, you're going to, even if they're ones you're familiar with, when you start the process of preparing them, they're probably not at the level that you want them to be. So you could use any specific excerpt to talk about a specific process, or in just a global, generalized way of how you think about it. But I'd be curious if you have sort of ways that you think about getting them from, I'm just starting to work on these, to they are ready to, quote, win an audition.
Right. That's a great uh, kind of a jumping off point. Because I think that it's changed a lot for me. I've had to discover the best way to work on it, the best way to keep track of things, and that was not a process that just started out as being great.
Mm-hmm.
It was definitely something that had to improve over time. I'm pulling up. Here's the. Let's see. Got my list of audition excerpts here from this past audition for the Marine Band. Um, what ended up working the best for me, and I have to say that in kind of with an asterisk there, is I think there are so many ways to improve on anything, and a lot of methods that work. I do think that there are some that work better for most people, but I don't think that anything is all inclusive, and I think that's true for not just audition prep, but for a lot of things that have to do with trumpet. That being said, this is what worked for me, and what I've learned has worked for a lot of people. I made sure that I took really specific notes on the stuff that I was doing. And I know that it's like, oh well, duh. But for those of you out there that have never tried keeping an audition journal, and keeping notes over what your excerpts are doing, and day to day, recording yourself every day and listening to it. The more people you listen to, they will all say that, and it's not a coincidence. And as somebody that didn't used to do that, now I know it really does make a difference. So I make sure that as I was working on all of these excerpts, I think there were, oh gosh, maybe 20 or so for this Marine Band audition. Um, I made sure to keep track of what was going on for each one. Now, the amount of detail that you can put into that is up to you. I think
Yeah.
that sometimes that can be as simple as just writing a few things in pencil on the piece of music itself. Um, and that might be all you need. On the other hand, one of our other folks from Brevard last year, Mark, amazing trumpet player, and the most organized and detailed person I've ever seen on audition notes. He's got a whole database that he's built on his computer about uh, keeping specific versions of excerpts, keeping all the audition notes from every audition, recordings, references, literature, uh, just it's an insane amount of notes on all that stuff. And it's a spectrum, so I think anywhere in there might be the right amount for you. But I know for me, I needed to start keeping track of it somehow. So I initially started by doing like a Google Doc and just putting every excerpt on there, and saying, "All right, here's some notes to start keeping track of." And that I tried that for some other auditions. I think that was a little hard for me to sustain, and especially having it all digital. It's easy to get distracted when you're on your computer or on your phone or
Right.
whatever. So
Right.
for this most recent audition, I ended up just using a good old little spiral notebook here. Um, and that ended up working really well. For me, I kept track of each excerpt. I wouldn't say it was day to day, but it was like lesson to lesson or recording to recording. I would make sure, I was getting a lot of lessons on all of this stuff and getting some great feedback. And I was also doing a lot of mock auditions. And between those two sources of feedback, basically each time I did one of those, I would go through and be like, all right, how did this excerpt sound? What was missing? What is left to be desired? And maybe should I try and do that next time? And then the next time I'd come about it, maybe the next mock I would do, before I did the mock, I would read through those 5 or 6 excerpts, the most recent notes that I had about, all right, how was this the last time I played it? What am I going to try and work on and be better at this time?
Yeah.
I don't think that would work if it's a brand new excerpt that you've never ever tried before and you just dive in straight from there. I think having a little bit of I wouldn't say a slower approach per se, but a one where you're like taking notes and then practicing it for a little bit. You got to remember for this audition, I well, I wouldn't say remember because I haven't told you yet, but for this audition, I knew pretty much all of the excerpts before from other auditions that I'd already taken. So there wasn't a lot of new stuff that I had to learn for this one. So that's why this method I think worked well for me because I didn't need to take detailed, okay, this is the first time I've ever seen this. I think this passage needs to go in this specific way. I didn't have to do that because I already had a little bit more of a knowledge of each excerpt. So the ability to just do kind of short, quick, here's what was good, here's what was bad, here's what to fix next time worked really well for me. And I think if I had an audition list, and I have had audition lists recently where it was a lot more stuff I didn't know, that's where maybe more of a Google Doc format
Mm.
with all that stuff would work on a little bit better. Getting to the end of the audition preparation cycle, when I remember this vividly. I was on the plane going to Washington D.C. and I was coming from California, so it was a nice long plane ride. I had just stolen a couple pieces of printer paper off the printer and threw them in my trumpet case. And on the plane, as I went over, um, I took out my little journal and I took out my music and I sort of cross referenced everything and I boiled it all down to what are the 3 most important things for me to do to make these excerpts successful. And I just wrote them down on this printer paper. And so I had a sheet of paper that was front and back, each excerpt, 3 short, like a couple words, bullet points. And that defined, like, okay, right now, right at the time of the audition, this is the stuff that if I can be successful on, it's going to go well. Um, this is very similar, I think, to process cues. If you've ever heard of process cues, it's something out of
Sure.
the Don Green Performance Success book, which I highly, highly recommend. I was not a big book person before starting my audition journey. A lot of the self-help stuff, I hadn't even been exposed to it. Um, but that book is written by, I guess, former U.S. Olympic dive coach, and now a professor of performance practice and performance psychology at, I think, Juilliard. Um, Amazing book about a lot of audition preparation, about performing under pressure, about uh, performance anxiety, a lot of things like that. Um, but reading in that book, one of the specific things that gets discussed is these process cues. And basically, what I had done is I'd taken all of my work, all of my effort, all of my scribbled out notes on the excerpts themselves, and all the stuff in my journal, and formed it down into a few little process cues for each one. And that way, the day of the audition, I ended up erasing most of all of the notes I had on my sheet music and just wrote those three or two things.
Mm.
And that way, while I'm taking my couple breaths before my excerpt, I'm just looking at those process cues. Everything else, all the work that I've done is basically funneled itself into these couple things.
Yeah.
And when I was able to internalize that and then do it, it was a very simple process. I didn't have to manage 10 or 15 different objectives for each excerpt.
Yeah, that all makes sense. It seems very practical too, like it's like you're digging in really hard during the process, but the goal is basically being, how can I like not forget it, but how can I let go of some of that stuff, focus on the really most important things, and then just trust that my preparation will be there when I'm not thinking about all 15 different things. Like it's just to trust that it'll be there. I'd love for you to comment on, because I think this is so important personally, that this idea, like we said, the audition is not a sprint, but it's a marathon. And some people, they do hit the jackpot early on, but myself and you and many other people, it's like a cumulative thing. Like the one you win is like a cumulative effort over the course of however many previous. And sometimes, you'll like waste a couple of auditions trying to figure things out. But my philosophy now is that if you just treat every audition like it's part of the one that you'll win eventually, I think you tend to take it more seriously in terms of how productive or efficient you try to be, right? Rather than just like playing the excerpts over and over and over, you're thinking like the system you talked about. How can I take notes? How can I incorporate recording? What role does feedback play? All that type of stuff. I'd love for you just to comment, maybe reflecting on your own many different auditions and what that was like, or just commenting on this idea in general.
Yeah. The audition circuit for me, the audition of the process of going through all these has been a little bit of a journey. Um, I did a lot of development and practice and kind of breaking down my technique into its smallest parts during the pandemic, like I'm sure many of us have. And coming out of that, I felt like I'd made some progress, and it was like, all right, I'm getting into the time of my life where I'm getting into grad school options. I'm definitely out of my undergrad, and what's next? Am I just gonna sit here and not do much, or am I gonna try and make something out of it and get into a group or something like that? And so that's when I was like, all right, I think it's time to start auditioning. And I had some encouragement. I had some friends and some teachers that were like, all right, get out there, start taking auditions. Um, and in the beginning, I really, I hesitate to say I didn't know what I was doing, but it sure felt like that, especially compared to now. And because you take auditions your whole musical career, I think, starting back from seventh grade honor band, there's always the opportunities to do auditions, but I think the skill of auditioning exists. I think there is a skill to doing it. And it's not just about your ability to play well, in the practice room, because there are so many people out there that do a great job playing, but the ability to then do that level of great playing when it really matters, when you've got a panel in front of you, when you got a bunch of other people nipping at your tail, um, that is a skill set. And luckily, it's not something that you're just innately good or bad at, and that'll never change. I'm so lucky, and it's the only thing that saved my butt, was that you can improve at it. You can be better at it. Um, and I think that as you're anticipating the process of auditioning, and you're looking down that path, it's not something that's just stagnant. It's not like trying to win the lottery. If that's your approach to auditioning, you're not doing it right. Luckily, unlike the lottery, you can stack these in your favor eventually. And so for my process of going through auditions, each time I went, I understood from luckily I had great mentors and friends and fellow colleagues who were also on the audition circuit, all telling me, hey, this is a journey. This is not just a one shot deal. And the goal here is to take it. And if you win, awesome. That's fantastic. Then you don't have to worry about it anymore. Your job's done. But if you don't, this is a process. This is a step in a long road. And that it's your job to learn from it and to take in information from it and to use this as a learning tool. I know I've heard a few people that are like, don't ever treat an audition like it's just an experience because then you'll never take it seriously. And I think there's a small amount of me that agrees with that. Like, you don't ever want to just half-ass it and excuse yourself from working hard because you're just writing it off as experience. I don't think that that's smart. I will also say there are auditions that I've taken sort of last minute where I haven't had the time to prepare to my fullest potential, and it didn't end up going well, and I felt kind of bad afterwards. I was like, I didn't get as much quote unquote experience out of this because I didn't try as hard as I could have.
Yeah.
And so I think when you're doing the audition circuit, it is really important to approach every audition like it's the one you're going to win. Um, but at the same time, if things don't go your way, you can't let that beat you up, and you have to understand that, kind of like it sounds like the book that you're just talking about with your students. It's a link in the chain. It's part of the journey.
Yeah.
And the most important part is to glean information from it.
I couldn't agree more, because then it feels like even if you quote lose, like you learn something from it. And then it's like at that stage, I've heard a lot of people say things like you either win or you learn. It's not you win or you lose. And so I just feel like it helps take some even the pressure off of it in the actual audition itself to say, well, of course I want to win this, but I've worked really hard and I know I'm going to learn from this experience. And so maybe I can just let the pressure off and just play. Can you take us through the audition itself? You don't have to tell us like every single excerpt you played, but I would be interested in maybe how you felt on each round. Do you feel like you played the very best you could on rounds? I've had ones where I feel like I did not play as well as I wish I would have, but for some reason the committee heard something and advanced me. I'm just curious, like, for you to take us to the day and kind of how it went and what you were feeling on the actual audition.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I did find extremely helpful, and that was one of my really keys to success specifically for this audition, was to keep track of this stuff that I'm about to talk to you about. I actually wrote it all down in my journal. I journaled in real time as I was going. Um, and I had done that a little bit before for other auditions. Like after a round, I would write down immediate feedback of how did it go? What was I thinking in the moment? What was distracting? What was something I didn't anticipate? Based off of my preparation, how did it end up turning out? Um, and I did manage to take some recordings of some of my audition rounds for most of the auditions I've ever done. Um, and then I could cross reference that later and be like, all right, depending on how I prepared, this is how it actually turned out. Now use that information to help prepare better the next time. Um, but even on the days of these auditions for the Marine Band, I was taking extensive notes on not just how the excerpts went, but how my process was working. I had a plan. I wrote down the plan, and then as I went, I monitored it and I said, all right, how's it going? What can I do better for the next round? What can I do better for tomorrow's rounds? Um, that really, really helped me. So I could take forever and go through that because I've got a lot of notes, but I'll give you basically the Cliff's notes of it. Because gosh, I started writing pages and pages of stuff in here. Um, So uh, gosh, where do I even start with this? Because it starts so far before the audition.
Let's just start. Let's just start round one.
Round one. Okay.
Round one. Let's just start there. How do you feel like you played? What were you thinking when you were told we were advancing, or that you advanced? Let's just start there.
Got it. So round one, I mean, I had done a lot of round ones at this point. And so it was more a question of, are you just going to be able to go in and do your job? Go in, play the excerpts, play them how you've played them before in other auditions that you've advanced in, meet the standard, basically. Keep it simple and do your job. These are the excerpts in the round one excerpts for most of these auditions. A lot of them are the same. You're gonna have your Ives. You're gonna have your, let's see what else was on round one here. You're gonna have your Hindemith. You're gonna have your outdoor overture. You know, there's so many of these things that you just always have on a first round. Um, and so luckily for me, I'd had a lot of experience playing these, practicing these, doing them on auditions. And so I could carry that little bit of confidence in with me. Um, but I know a lot of people have different headspaces that they like to be in for an audition. I know depending on who you are, maybe you need to calm down. I know a lot of people, including myself, are kind of in that boat. And then there's other people that need to get like amped up. You know, there's a very well-known trumpet player I know that listened to like some heavy metal, some death metal before going in to really get amped up. It depends on you, and through experience, you'll kind of learn where you fit on that spectrum. But
Sure.
for me, I know that I needed to keep my cool, and that it was harmful for me to be distracted. Kind of like that very early audition where I heard that guy doing some amazing sight reading. It's like that doesn't help me very much. So for my prelims audition, I was very. It's almost like I was a boxer walking in with the hood up and you know can't even see him, and you know just like I was very much blinders on for that first round, trying to keep my attention focused on what I was trying to do, not trying to make a lot of small talk, not trying to play all my excerpts in the warm up room for everyone to hear.
Yeah.
Luckily, actually, there was not anybody in my warm up room this year that did that, but I have heard that before.
Yep.
Um,
Definitely.
the just the staying in my zone and in my lane was really important for me for that round. Um, and through my previous audition experiences, I had been noticing that one thing I struggled with was getting my heart rate under control. You know, and I'd done a lot of stuff with kind of meditation and mental processes to go through and different kinds of breathing and stuff like that. But and it worked to a degree, but I knew that it hadn't always been super successful or hadn't been as effective as I wanted it to be. So I was a little bit aware of that as I went into the audition. I was like, all right, keep your head on, keep cool. Um, One of the problems was that my, I guess, heart rate being a little bit raised and being elevated had started to distract me from doing my excerpts well and being able to really focus on the excerpts. And that's something that had sort of pulled me apart, especially in the later rounds for other auditions. So I was just aware of that in my prelims. I went in. Um, I do like to stay really positive. I'd like to say hello to the audition coordinator at the door, whoever's helped running it. I do enjoy just talking with them a little bit. It helps me loosen up. So I made sure to do that when I was waiting in the green room and waiting to go when you know I was on deck and that sort of stuff. And then staying positive as I went through the door into the audition room, just smiling. You know, there's that kind of, if you smile, it kind of engages your endorphins and stuff like that. So just smiling, being happy, being appreciative of being there. Um, Walked in, put my stuff down, um, played my prelims round to the best of my ability. And I mean, at that point, again, I'd done a lot of these excerpts before, so it went fine. Um, I will say I don't think there's anybody that's won a job out there that said everything was 100% perfect. Um, I think the most important part is that you're musically convincing, and that if you are really musically convincing and you're conveying your message of the music and your technique is strong, I think if there are some little blips here and there, they're much less noticeable rather than if you're just trying to be perfect and not focusing on your kind of conviction as much, then the blips that happen are much more noticeable. So um, there may have been maybe a blip in here somewhere or something that might wasn't quite as in tune as I wanted to be, something like that. Um, but overall, it was a pretty strong first round. So I walked out. And the way they do it for the Marine Band is I think every 5 people they will deliberate and say, or it's either 5 or 10. I think for me it was 5. Um, and then they'll deliberate and say, all right, who do they want to have come back tomorrow? Who do they want to come back the next day for the semifinal round? And so I went in and waited for my 5 people to finish, and they came in and they said that myself and the person that I went right after me had been advanced, and I was like, okay, great, that's the message I wanted. I'm going home.
Yeah, yeah.
And because I've got work to do, I've got a big day tomorrow, and so I left. My college roommate, actually from undergrad, was also there taking the audition, and we ended up having some dinner together, which is nice to catch up. But then after that, I got home at a reasonable hour, with enough time to plan for the next day. And that's, I think, where things started to get different for me in ways that are better than previous auditions. I got home, I got to where I was staying, and didn't just practice for 3 hours straight for the excerpts for the next day because I didn't know them. They don't give you that list ahead of time. You get it when you get into the green room. And so I was like, all right, we're probably not going to play much of what we played today. So what's left? And how can I really make sure to max that stuff out? So I did a lot of listening that night. I did a lot of still continuing to edit my process cues and make sure it was all nailed, get all the nuts and bolts tightened. I did a little bit of playing through each excerpt, but really not very much. And then the most important part happened was I went to my notes and I started writing. And I wrote down my plan for the next day. When are you going to get there? When are you going to have lunch? When are you going to drink water? When, like, when are you going to get up and go to the bathroom? Like really, I wrote like a checklist for the next day of auditioning. What needs to happen? When are you going to do it? I had already decided in my brain I'm going to win this audition. That was and I know that sounds a little kind of eggheaded, a little bit uh, selfish, but I had to have the mindset of like, all right, I'm going to win this audition, so here's the things that need to happen. So I even wrote out, all right, once you get through semifinals, then what do you do? It's going to be a short turnaround from semifinals to finals. So in that 45 minutes or maybe hour that you're going to have, what do you need to do? I remember on that list, one of the things was analyze my semifinals performance. How did it go? What things could I continue to improve on? What things might have been a little bent out of shape? Um, just again, following my idea of journaling and taking these notes. And I wrote it all. I gave myself instructions. And it really helped because then I got there on whatever that was, Tuesday morning. And I didn't have to think very hard about what to do. I just followed the instructions that I gave myself based on feedback from the day before. And that really helped. And uh, I had a phone call that night, the night before the semis and finals, with my fiance. And I had said, all right, here's how the day went. It was pretty good. I felt my heart rate get a little funky in the first round. And I'm just hoping that it goes well today. And bless the stars above, she said, "Oh well," and she's also a musician. She's a wonderful tuba player, and she told me, "Oh, just use this breathing thing that I know." And somehow I had never heard of it. I'd done a lot of breathing stuff, but I had never heard of this breathing technique. Um, And she said, "Oh, you just do that. Just try it." And I tried it for like 5 seconds on the phone call with her. And instantly my heart rate went from crazy to 60.
Wow.
And I was like, "Wow, wait a minute. This is the one thing that I've kind of been self-conscious about, and that it's kind of been eking in the back of my brain of like, hey, you don't panic, you know." Um, and she just dropped this truth bomb on me right the night before, and it was like, okay, well, I'll try it tomorrow. The worst thing it's going to do is make me breathe. So what do I have to lose?
Yeah.
Um, and that was incredible. That piece of information. I can talk about that a little more in a minute, but um, the last thing I did that night before just putting everything in my case and going to bed was affirmations. And again, kind of like reading into the self-help books, I had never been super a believer in that, and was like, okay, there's probably people that work for. I don't really need to try it. I don't need to whatever. But again, this is the process of learning. You got to keep an open mind, stay objective. And I was like, well, again, is it going to hurt me to try this? No. And if it doesn't work, is it something that will help me learn for next time? Yes. So let's just try it. Let's do some affirmations. There's a lot of ways you can do affirmations. You can do a mantra, you can do just talking to yourself, you can write it down, you can write post-it notes. There's so many ways to do that. But I just tried something really simple. I just wrote, I felt a little bit like I was in Harry Potter, writing it in detention for Professor Umbridge. I was just writing the same few lines in my notebook. And actually, I think I can find them here. Let's see. After round one, let's see. I wrote, "I am a winner. I have what it takes, and I will win."
Mm.
And I just wrote it a bunch of times in a row, and I felt really stupid writing it down the first like 3 or 4 or 6 lines. But by the time I got to the end of the page, I was like, dang it, I am a winner. I can do this. Like it was so weird. I like got goosebumps by the time I got to the end of the page. I was like, heck yeah, let's go kick ass tomorrow. And it was like, okay, I guess this is working. Whatever it is, I'm feeling pretty great right now. So let's go to bed and get it figured out and do tomorrow. And that was kind of the last thing I did. Now, I had mentioned like it's kind of weird to start on the first day of the audition in terms of recounting it all because there's so much more that happens before then. But
Sure, sure.
I think I would love to make a point about this. There are so many things that you can work on. There's so many pieces of information, so many ways to prepare that can help you be better at an audition. And through the process of doing a lot of auditions, you start to find more and more. And sometimes that can feel like a big mountain, especially if you're just beginning. It's like, wow, that's so much stuff that I could get better at. How do I do all that? That's so much to tackle. And I think trying to do it all for one audition, maybe your first ever audition, it's like impossible. Some of the stuff you don't even know what to fix yet.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
but I will say that going through my experience auditioning, I did start to nail a lot of that stuff down. One great example, thinking about going to sleep after that first night of auditioning, was I was flying from California, and there's a 3-hour jet lag involved in that process. And if you're auditioning for a military band, sometimes you could go in the 8 a.m. group or the 9 a.m. group on a Monday morning. And if you've just flown in from California, you're already jet lagged by 3 hours, and if you're going to get up and beat the DC traffic on a Monday morning, get your routine in before you leave. Yeah. And, on your warm up and then arrive and do the audition at 9 a.m. That can feel like waking up and doing routine at like 3 or 2 a.m. in your body clock. And that kicked my butt so many times because I didn't prepare very well for it. And over the course of doing a lot of auditions, I realized that was an issue. I realized that during the day of an audition, I got really tired and my mental focus just went down the drain because I was tired. I was exhausted. So for this audition, I spent the entire week and a half before it rewinding my body clock. I started getting up earlier and going to bed earlier. And by the time the day before I left, I woke up at I think 3:30 in the morning and did routine, and then went to bed at 8:30 at night.
Mm.
And that way I could arrive in DC, wake up, do an early routine, drive in and get to the audition and feel like $1,000,000 because it totally is just what I've been used to.
Wow.
Stuff like that sounds ridiculous. It sounds like, oh, that is so over the top. And I've got countless more examples of just really minute detail kind of stuff like that. That by on its own, it's like, how could that make a difference? Maybe that's such a minuscule thing, But when you add all of those things up and start tackling and finding solutions for all of the issues that you end up facing, you start running out of reasons to fail.
Mm.
And I think if there's a way to summarize my experience getting to the end of that audition and winning, I feel like I by no means was perfect. And I don't want to insinuate that at all. If I had not won that audition, I could have gone home and written another laundry list of things to keep improving at and keep finding new solutions for. But I think in the process of getting to where you're performing at that level, if you keep going and tackling stuff and working on it and maybe struggling a little bit and finding new solutions, um, you start running out of all of the reasons to fail that other people still might have. um, and a lot of an audition is just making it to the end, being the last person standing. um, and I realized through this process, every audition I had taken up to that point, there was something that had kept me from winning. Whether it was not having enough sleep, or whether it was my mental approach, or whether it was just getting my heart rate under control. Eventually, you start figuring out ways to solve all those problems. And then when the audition happens, there's not much left that can go wrong. Um, and kind of going back to my timeline here of doing the audition, that night when I figured out how to breathe well and I had written out my whole day and I had done a lot of work to figure out how to get in the mental right space and stay focused, it was like I got into the semis audition and I was like, all right, get at me. What else is there? I feel ready for this. And whatever excerpt you want to throw at me, whatever sight reading, whatever you want me to play again, maybe in a different style, like I'm ready for this because I haven't let myself slack on the details. I've made sure to cover my bases and pack my parachutes, all that sort of stuff, so that when it comes time to do the job, I I feel really ready for it. And that's what I did. I went into that semifinals audition. Um, I had tried that breathing thing, and it was amazing. I mean, I'm walking in there a little, still feeling confident, but it's like, all right, how do I keep my heart rate under control? How when I'm playing, let's see if I pull up my semifinals audition list here. Um, I'm getting into Festivo, which are all those notes. I'm getting into Toccata Martial. I'm really Royal March too, getting all those quintuplets in a row. How do I manage this and keep things in control? I did the breathing thing. It's called a box breath for everybody that's wondering. It's where you take in a slow breath that's metered. You hold it at the top or suspend it at the top, and then you release it for the same amount of time. Actually, I like to double the amount of time that you take to release it all. And then you pause at the bottom too for, let's say it's 3 counts in, 3 counts suspend, 6 counts out, 3 counts at the bottom. And then you just do that cycle maybe 2 or 3 times. Um, and I started that audition. I sat down and did the box breathing. And no joke, I could have looked at my watch and my heart rate, and it probably was at 60. Like
Wow.
it was just absolutely cool as a cucumber. And as soon as I got to that point and I realized that this last thing that was holding me back was now a thing of the past, it was like, okay, let's go. I've got total focus and control over what I'm doing. I know how to manage it if it gets weird. I know what I'm doing. Let's just do it. Um, Played my semis, felt awesome. Felt really, really great. I walked out of the semis being like, I'm very content with how that round went. There's always little things here that you want to improve, but considering how I prepared and the type of preparation I was doing and knowing how well I could play it, I felt like that was really representative, which I think is what you want at the end. Finished semis, immediately went to my book, my journal, and I had my laundry list waiting. I was like, all right, analyze everything. I didn't even know that I had advanced out of semis yet. They hadn't finished semifinals, but I was like, I'm here to win this audition. So if that means that if I'm going to win, I need to advance past semis. So I need to start writing down my notes for finals. And I did. I spent I'm sure everybody else went into the group room afterwards, the hangout room, and started chatting. But I was back in my little practice room, writing furiously, trying to get it all in so that by the time they announced who was in finals, like I'd be done. I took notes on everything. I analyzed how I played, what was working, what was different. I made sure to write down, hey, do that breathing thing again, because it was awesome the first time. And they called us all in. They said, all right, the people that are advancing to the finals are these 3 people. And I was one of those people. And I was like, okay, well, that's right along with my calculation here. That's what I've been planning on. So now let's implement stuff that I need to do. So I went back, and it was a short turnaround. I think I went 3rd out of 3 for finals. But I mean, they started within 15 minutes. So I had 15 minutes, and then I had to wait for the other 2 people to go. And then it was my turn. And so I went back and did a little bit more listening, a little bit of, I've got a very detailed process that I could spend another hour talking about. But I went back and did that work while I was waiting. And one of the last things that I did, I didn't want to play too much getting ready for the finals. It's really easy to overplay in your warm-up room or whatever in the green room. So by the suggestion of other people, I listened to some music. And I had turned on, and this might be weird, but it wasn't like Taylor Swift, although if that's your jam, please, that's, you got to do what you got to do. But I turned on this recording. It's a pretty new recording that came out maybe a year and a half ago now by the National Brass Ensemble. They did this huge brass ensemble recording of the Ring Cycle. They took Tim Higgins, the principal trombone of the San Francisco Symphony. He wrote out basically each opera of the Ring Cycle into a movement of this piece. And it turned out to be like an hour of music. I didn't listen to the whole thing. I just turned on the very beginning, just coming out of the Rhine, and listened to that. And it was beautiful. This ensemble is some of my just absolute Mount Rushmore of players across all the brass instruments, and it's beautiful, beautiful playing, great recording. And it was very powerful. And I hadn't listened to this album very much. I just knew it was great. So I was like, let's just turn it on and see if I can listen to some great players and let it motivate me. And no joke, I was almost in tears at the end of it. I was like choking up in the practice room before I went into the finals. Like, oh my gosh, this music is like overwhelming me. I'm like so emotionally impacted by the way that they're playing and the nuance and the beauty. And I'm so thankful that I get to do this as part of my life. I'm so grateful that I get to experience this wonderful music, that I get to participate in it in any form or fashion. And I'm just so lucky to be here and have so much of this gratitude for what I'm doing. And like right when that was over, I'm still, drying my eye a little bit. And the audition person comes in and says, all right, it's your turn. It's time to go. And I'm like, okay, let me clean myself up a little bit and get my horns and get out of here. But that last kind of moment of appreciation for what I was doing, I hadn't really realized how much I needed that, and to be able to go into an audition where there's so many pressures on you to play well from yourself and from the panel and from everybody around you, all your friends and people that are expecting you to do well. I just needed a minute to be thankful and to be appreciative of what was going on. And that piece of music was it, I guess, for me. It just hit me right in the right spot at the right time. And I went into that audition room, and that was definitely the hardest round. I mean, there was all the sight reading stuff, there was section playing, there was a lot of excerpts, more than the previous two rounds, and they had me do more. They brought back some old excerpts to do, kind of on a whim. It was a big round. But the whole time, all I could think of was just, gosh, I'm keeping my heart rate under control. I'm focused, and I'm so thankful to be here. And all I want to do is enjoy this making music with the panel. For that final round, they put down the curtain so I could actually see and interact with the panel, which was very nice. Made me much more comfortable. And it was like, I'm going to play, and can we just enjoy this together? I'm having a great time. I hope you guys are having a great time. I know you've had a long 2 days. Can we just enjoy playing some trumpet here for a second? And that round went well. I did as well as I thought I could have on the excerpts that I played. And again, 3 for 3. It's like I could have played some things better in that. By no means was it a pristine, 100% on Guitar Hero round, but it was another accurate representation of my playing.
Yeah.
Which anybody, I think, would hope that's what you got to hope for when you get into an audition, and what you're striving for. I walked out, and it was like, all right, well, they're going to need some time to deliberate. So I'm going to pack up my stuff and go meet the other 2 finalists and finally talk a little bit. I asked hey, are we going to play again? And they said, no, we are not going to have a super finals. That was it. So I was like, all right, I don't need to keep the blinders on anymore. Let's just let it all out. Let's release. Went and talked with the other folks that were in the audition room. And didn't have to wait super long. It was kind of a shorter deliberation than some of the other ones I've been to. And they came back and they said, hey, candidate number 44, that's me. You've been chosen. And I've had actually several people ask me, what was that moment like? And I found it very strange. And I even it was like a little bit of an out of body experience. I was my conscience was looking at myself being like, why are you reacting this way? Because I didn't super react. It wasn't like a Tiger Woods winning the Masters, yes, kind of a moment. It was okay. And I think, again, going back to what I had said earlier, the idea of preparing enough to where there isn't a lot left to go wrong, and having an intention to complete a goal rather than just hoping you'll make it. I think that really changed how I reacted in the end, because if you're hoping to win, if that's the only thing that's propelling you forward, and you're like, oh gosh, I hope I win the lottery, I hope I get it this time, then maybe if you won, lucky you, but if you won, then it would be like, yes, God, just a big celebration, because you didn't know you were going to do well, and you didn't know for sure that you played your best. But for me, I had just planned really hard. I'd really taken apart all of the things I needed to work on and started to X them off to a degree that they were much, much better now than they had ever been in the past. And with the plan being, all my affirmations, I'd continue to do affirmations for all the rounds after the prelims. It was always just the plan is to win. The plan is to get here and be successful at the plan that you set out at the beginning. And so when they walked in and he told me the news, I was like, thank you. I said a very heartfelt thank you, and shook the hands of the other 2 people. And I said, hey, thanks for kicking my ass all the way here, making me perform at this level. And I felt great for those guys, knowing that they made it all the way there. I'm sure that they're going to be, if they could make it all the way to finals of that audition, that they're going to be successful very soon. And I told them that, and I said, you guys are next. I'm ready for you. And thanks for kicking my butt for this process. And I went up and I met a bunch of people with the administration. I met the director. I met some of the trumpet section. Um, and just talk, there's some logistical things that you have to talk about when you get all that done. But yeah, then it was over. Then I came home and I had planned to take a flight home that night back to California, and I didn't have a great way of getting there because getting all the way through the finals, you're there pretty late in the day, and it was kind of an evening flight. So I was like, can anybody give me a ride to the airport? And one of the people in the band she was so nice. She was the person that ran the whole audition. She's one of the flute players. Her name's Ellen, and she was wonderful and gave me a ride all the way over to BWI. It was kind of a long drive to get up there. And we talked about being in the band. She was like, hey, if you need to call anybody, like, I'll just close my ears. You say what you need to say and get, let it happen. And of course I called my fiance, I called my teachers, I called my family, and got to talk with her a lot about being in the band and what it's going to be like and being a member of the Marines and all that. And it was wonderful. And I got on the plane, luckily made it just in time. Flew home, got home at like midnight, which in DC is like 3 a.m. So I was really zonked at that point, and woke up and went to school the next day. And it was like, whoa, all right, here we go, back into it. And in talking with the folks at the band, that we had arranged for me to start a little later so I could finish school and stuff like that. So I knew that it wasn't like start packing up your house tomorrow.
Right.
I knew that I would still have some time before I started in the group. But yeah, it was an amazing experience. And knowing that my process paid off was awesome. It's very gratifying to know that when you make a plan well enough that it's going to work was great. And it gave me some insight. I feel like I worked twice as hard on this audition than any of the ones I'd done before. I purposefully said no to some performing opportunities and to some other auditions. I didn't do any grad school or Dr. DMA auditions. I didn't do any festival auditions. I kind of let it all slide. I kind of put all my eggs in that basket of like, all right, instead of half-assing it on your preparation, go all in and actually do all those things that you tell yourself, I'd be better if I did this.
Yeah.
When I actually took the time to do it, it worked. And I was very happy about that. And I know that for anything else, I've got a big recital coming up. I've got obviously performances with the band and any other kind of big playing opportunities coming up. I know that I can trust the process and being open to new ideas and being open to continuous improvement is something that's worth doing. And it takes more effort to do that, but it's worth doing because the results bear out.
There's nothing else left to say. That was so, I appreciate it's awesome that you took all those notes so you could be that like detailed with that answer. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure exactly what I thought, but it was so cool to hear kind of like a whole walkthrough. I appreciate you being willing to go there and help us understand and see kind of what you were feeling and what that was like. And there's a whole bunch for me to take away and think about. Because I'm certainly someone who takes notes in my practice. I've like got this journal right here from a previous audition.
It looks same size even. This is the little whatever that is.
Well, this one's got like it's like my
nice.
Yeah, my daughter made this one for me. Anyway, long story short, there's so many sort of overlapping things that I feel like I do that are similar to what you've talked about. But like I think there are some things that you've just taken further than what I've done. And like you said, you could say, oh, that's like so extreme. Like this is way too much. But at the same time, like look at where it took you. And whether you won the job or not, like if you believe there's nothing else let's say you didn't win the job. I bet you still would have felt like there's really not much more I could add to this process that would help me feel prepared. And if that's the case, then you're just like, well, let me do exactly the same thing next time, and hopefully that one lands, and then the same thing the next time. And then it just becomes like a numbers game after that. So you're just like trying to cull and refine the system you're using to prepare. And once you feel like you've got a great system, then you just keep applying it until the right thing hits. So it's like basically not wasted no matter what happens. Just because you can say I won this audition doesn't mean that if you didn't win it, it would be any less valuable. And that's
totally.
it's such a cool takeaway for me to hear you say that, because I like totally believe you. Like I totally believe that regardless of what this outcome was, you like checked so many of the boxes and did everything you could. And I'm sure myself and anyone listening has had examples, you as well, where maybe you didn't check every box, you know? And so the continual effort of adding more boxes to check because it's worth it to you is a very good story. And I appreciate you being like, the whole context of like why you can say that thing at the end is like super, super amazing. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. No, and I think there is, I mean, I have to put a disclaimer on there. It's like, it's kind of like you said, there's like a certain number of boxes, and it's like, well, what if I check them all? Sometimes that will work out. Sometimes it will. Sometimes, though, there's stuff that you don't anticipate. Maybe, especially if you're new to auditioning, there might be portions of that process, or maybe the way that you practice, or who knows how many things down the line that you might not be aware that they're an issue yet, or you might not be aware that there's a better way to do it. And sometimes you only get that awareness by failing.
Sure.
You know, and I think it's in that perspective, it's about failing upward. It's about realizing that there will be more stuff that comes into your focus of things to work on, and that at a certain point you check enough of those things that everybody else around you just won't be able to keep up.
Yeah.
And that I think the real question is that of all the things you know of that you can work on, they aren't out of your, you know, it's not the, you don't know about things that you don't know about. You know, if it's stuff that you do know about, are you willing to put in the effort to check all of them off? And I know that I've heard that from a lot of people. I've heard that. I got some amazing audition advice along those lines from Jeff Strong. He plays here in the LA Phil. And one of the final things that he said in his discussion was, you know, if when you're approaching an audition, can you get to the end and say, I prepared in every way I knew how? That doesn't necessarily mean there won't be new ways to improve after that audition, but like up to that point, can you confidently say, I did everything? And I heard him say that many, many auditions ago. And it stuck with me. It was like, oh, that's awesome. But I can also pretty fairly say I didn't finish a lot of those auditions being like, okay, I prepared in every way I could.
Yeah.
This audition, I got a lot closer. I'll say that. I think compared to previous auditions, this Marine Band audition, it was like, I got to the end of it and I was like, wow, that is so much more work and so many more things that I've done to prepare for this than anything in the past. I've worked so hard on this. And, you know, to people that are listening, that can sound scary. It's like, oh, that sounds like a lot of work. Yes, it is a lot of work, but it doesn't all have to happen tomorrow. It's something that happens over time, over the course of a whole audition cycle, or maybe even several. I mean, for the case for me, for most people that are on the circuit, it's several auditions that takes place. But you have to know that getting into, you know, a group like that, or anything that involves really high level performing, you're probably going to have to get that work. You will have to put in that work. And I think having the mindset right away of being like, okay, bring it on, let's go. That kind of acceptance of the challenge and acceptance of knowing it's going to be a lot of work that you're willing to put in, that makes the difference. There's so many people that can get into an orchestra, or can get into a military band, or can go into a solo career, but how many put in the work? You know.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sound like I'm on a high horse. It's like, oh, I worked harder than everybody else, but I used to be on the side of like, oh, I'll try, you know, I'll attempt to do enough. I'll put in some effort. But it wasn't until I really sat down with myself and looked myself in the mirror and said, that's not enough. You need to do everything. That it worked out.
Yeah.
So I think that's something important to know, is that if you want to make success at that level, or you just want to improve really quickly, a lot of it depends on how much investment you put in and how dedicated you are to the process.
Yeah. Well, I can say I'm inspired by hearing you for sure. And I think, if anything, it just encourages me to keep trying that hard for various things. You know, sometimes it can be easy to, well, even on things that maybe aren't on the same level or global level as an audition. Maybe it's still, but maybe it's like, I'm going to play something in the orchestra I've played a whole bunch of times. Well, like, is there reason or effort, or is there reason that I could put in more effort that I'm putting in right now? And is there a gain? You know what I mean? Just thinking more that way. This conversation has certainly got me thinking that way. I'm sure whoever is listening is also got thoughts and they're thinking about certain things. And I'm curious if there's a way that someone could get a hold of you if they were interested in kind of bouncing some ideas off, or they want to have like some sort of follow-up questions. Is there a way someone could get a hold of you?
Yes, absolutely. I think probably the easiest for people out there is to send me a message on Instagram or on Facebook. You can find me at Ben Gunnarson. Um, and I usually am able to see that stuff and respond. I mean, I also, if you're interested in lessons, I also teach and do one-on-one teaching, but also do kind of master classes and stuff like that. So if that's something anybody's interested in, I'm available there, but pretty easy to find online. I'm around.
Well, I appreciate your time. This has been a very awesome conversation. And I know that there's, as you were talking about, there's much more. So maybe you and I can get back together sometime in the future and continue the conversation. But as for now, I really, really appreciate your time and just being so willing to be open and share about your process. It's been great.
Thank you. No, it's been my pleasure. This has been great.
I want to quickly thank Brandon Jochumn for his work on mastering this episode of the podcast. You can check Brandon out at epiphanyrecordingstudio.com. And most of all, I would like to thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we will see you in the next one.